Hi, I'm Dave Gardy from Maritime TV studios near Washington, D.C. for this special presentation, the 5th Ballast Water Treatment Report, here from our studios near Washington, D.C. And with us on the phone right now, actually via Skype from New York, is Steve Candito, who is the CEO of Ecochlor. Steve, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Dave. Good afternoon.
Now, the Coast Guard just updated their FAQs. I think it was about April 24th. Can you give us an overview of some of the changes that happened in those FAQs?
Sure. That document is actually a very extensive document with a lot of good information in it. But as I went through it, there were about 6 or 7 significant changes that I think the industry should be aware of. So let me go through a couple of them to start with. The first one is actually something that the industry has been very focused on, which is whether the Coast Guard requirements are the same as the IMO requirements. And initially, the Coast Guard was suggesting that the standards were about the same, but as we found out, there really was a big distinction between whether the organisms could be non-viable or whether they actually had to be dead. So that's one of the key changes in these updated frequently asked questions. And of course, it was the IMO regulation that only required non-viable. So it's that the Coast Guard still requires them to be dead, and they just changed the frequently asked questions document. So, there's another one, too, that was also interesting. It was when the IMO ratified the regulations, there was a question in there about whether the Coast Guard would do something different. Now that the IMO has ratified the regulations, the Coast Guard's made it clear that they're not changing anything.
Okay. Are there other changes that they made to the FAQs?
Yeah, so they also added a few more sections on issues that really weren't relevant before. So, for example, the fact that we've had a lot of ballast water management systems fail and then difficulties in discharging the water. So the frequently asked questions now address those kinds of things. And we talked about this in a prior segment where you can still do things like exchange or use potable water or, of course, not discharge the ballast water. So that's explained better now in this frequently asked question document. And then there was a follow-up one on the potable water. This was a little bit odd. I guess if there are some that are going to use potable water, in whether that the Coast Guard could approve the potable water facility. And the Coast Guard came back and said, nope, we can't do that. You actually have to go to the EPA or even a state regulator to designate whether that potable water is clean enough or not.
Just so ship owners know, how frequently does the Coast Guard update these FAQs?
Well, it's interesting. They really don't update them much. I think they did it this time just because they recognized that there were some significant changes both on the primarily on the IMO side, where they needed to address some of the things that weren't clear enough in the prior document. But for the most part, it's a pretty standard document.
So what's lately been happening? Can you give us an update on how the assimilation into the whole regulations are going with the ship owners?
Well, the whole process is becoming more and more stringent. That's actually one of the other distinctions is, at one time the Coast Guard was giving these extensions to install the system based on the dry dock date fairly easily. Now it's very difficult. You've got to have some good paperwork, some good justification, and the extension will only be for 12 months. That's set out in the new frequently asked questions as well. And then really the last change or the last addition was there was a concern about approved systems where the manufacturer went bankrupt. There was one manufacturer that went bankrupt. They're back in business now after being acquired by another entity. But the Coast Guard made it clear that even if your manufacturer of your system goes bankrupt, you can still use that system. The approval continues as long as you operate it in accordance with the original specifications. If you start doing something different, then the approval might not apply. So that was kind of the last significant change in this recent update.
Excellent. Well, we appreciate the time you're taking for us today for this Ballast Water Treatment Report number 5. I've been talking with Steve Candito, who's CEO of Ecochlor. Steve, thanks for joining us from New York.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate it.
I'm Dave Gardy from Maritime TV from our studios near Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.